The wind howled across the barren plains of the forgotten planet as the small shuttle descended through the thick atmosphere. Inside, four explorers sat silently, each lost in their own thoughts. They had come far, bought this land for cheap, and carried the dream of building something new, something better than the broken lives they had left behind. When the shuttle landed with a rough shake, they looked through the dust-covered windows and saw it for the first time. An enormous abandoned military base, black metal walls rising from the earth like the skeleton of some ancient creature. The gates stood wide open, rust eating at their edges, and the silence around them felt heavier than the planet's gravity. Still, the leader, a man named Marcus, forced a smile and stepped forward. "Home," he said, though his voice carried more doubt than confidence. They carried their gear into the base, the sound of boots echoing through empty corridors. The air smelled of iron and ash, like a fire long dead. Broken lights flickered weakly overhead, casting moving shadows that made every corner look alive. Sarah, the youngest in the group, pressed close to Marcus, whispering that she thought she heard something, a scraping sound just ahead. The others laughed nervously, claiming it was just the old building settling, but even their chuckles died quickly in the vast silence. They reached a central hall, tall ceilings arching above them, and set down their packs. Dust swirled in the stale air, and their voices bounced back unnaturally, too loud, too sharp. They tried to talk of plans, where to sleep, how to secure the base, but every word felt swallowed by unseen ears. As night fell, the group lit lanterns, their small glow pushing back the dark. Sarah couldn't sleep, her eyes kept drifting to the shadows at the edge of the hall. Once, she thought she saw a shimmer, like metal reflecting faint moonlight, though there was no moon above this planet. Her heart pounded, and she pulled the blanket tighter. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the far corridor, a deep, metallic clank, like chains rattling against steel. Everyone sat up instantly, eyes wide, weapons clutched though they had come expecting no danger. Marcus tried to calm them, but his voice trembled. They moved together toward the sound, lantern light shaking in their hands. The corridor stretched on, darker than the rest, walls covered with strange claw-like marks. Sarah ran her fingers over one, feeling how deep the grooves were. "No machine did this," she whispered, but no one replied. At the end of the hallway, they found a locked steel door, thicker than any they had passed before. It was dented inward, as if something powerful had once tried to break free. On the floor before it lay shattered chains, huge links bigger than a human hand, cold with age yet strangely heavy when Marcus lifted one. The others shifted uneasily, the air around them suddenly warmer, like breath against the back of their necks. Just then, the lantern in Sarah's hand flickered and died, plunging them into thick blackness. A low growl vibrated through the hall, deep and alive, so close it made their bones shake. Someone cursed and fumbled for light, and when the lantern flared again, Sarah swore she saw two glowing eyes staring at them from the shadows beyond the door. They blinked once, slowly, before vanishing as if swallowed by the darkness. The group stumbled back, hearts racing, arguing in hushed tones about what they had seen. Some said it was just reflection, others insisted it was an animal, but none of them truly believed their own words. That night, no one slept. Every creak, every distant sound, every brush of air felt like a presence watching them. Marcus sat awake, staring into the darkness, clutching the broken chain in his hand. Somewhere deep in the base, something was alive, something that was never meant to be found. The morning came heavy and grey, though the sun had risen high above the planet. Inside the base, the explorers moved slowly, their eyes red from lack of sleep, their nerves stretched thin. The silence of the place was no longer quiet but full, a silence that pressed on their ears until every breath, every footstep, every small sound seemed too loud. Marcus tried to speak with confidence, telling the others they had to focus on work, but even he glanced often toward the dark corridor where they had seen the eyes. Sarah said nothing, but her mind kept replaying the glow she swore was real. She could still feel the weight of that stare, a stare that seemed more intelligent than any beast's. They spent the day cleaning the main hall and moving supplies, but unease followed them. When Daniel went to fetch food from their storage, he froze. Boxes had been shifted, opened, and inside the wrappers were ragged tears, as if something had clawed through them. More than half their dried meat was gone. He called the others, and they gathered around, whispering in disbelief. There had been no signs of entry from outside. Marcus suggested maybe rats or scavenger animals, but the sharp, deep cuts in the packaging didn't look like anything so small. Sarah bent closer and lifted a fragment of plastic. There were markings on it, 3 long scratches, as if made by talons. She said it softly, and the others hushed her quickly, but no one could deny the evidence in front of them. That night, they set up their security cameras, placing them carefully around the hallways. Old but functional, the cameras blinked red as they began recording. Still, none of them rested. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing faint noises beyond the walls, scratches, the drag of something heavy, a sound like breathing but too deep to belong to any of them. At last, Marcus ordered everyone to stay close, no wandering off, no heroics. When the monitors lit up with static and faint movement, the group crowded around the screen. At first, it was only flickers, shadows passing quickly across corridors. Then one camera caught it clear, a massive shape moving at the edge of the lens. The form was reptilian, scaled, low to the ground with a tail that swept the dust behind it. The lantern light glimmered faintly against what looked like wings folded tight against its body. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth. The figure paused, then lifted its head as though it could feel the camera watching. 2 eyes glowed for a moment, sharp and alive, before the image cut to static. Daniel swore under his breath, trying to fix the feed, but the cameras refused to respond. The group stared at each other, the truth pressing into their bones. This was no trick of light, no rat, no simple scavenger. Something alive, something impossible, was inside this base with them. Marcus tried to steady his voice. "We stay calm. We don't provoke it. Tomorrow we search." But the tremor in his words betrayed him. Later that night, Sarah heard it again. She had been sitting quietly near the firelight when the sound of chains dragging across the floor reached her ears. Slowly, carefully, she followed the sound, lantern clutched in shaking hands. Down the hall, near the locked steel door they had found before, she froze. The chains they had seen broken were now gone, pulled into the shadows. Her lantern flickered, and for a breathless second she saw movement, scales catching the dim light, a long tail curling out of sight. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would draw the creature toward her. The growl came again, deeper now, resonating through the very walls. She stumbled back, dropping the lantern, and it shattered. In the darkness, she thought she felt heat, like the air was burning softly against her skin. Then she ran, racing back to the others, breathless and trembling. She told them what she had seen, what she had felt, and for the first time, Marcus did not argue. He simply looked toward the shadows and admitted what none of them wanted to say. This base was not empty. It was never abandoned. It was hiding something, something powerful, something dangerous, and it was awake. The third night on the base came colder than the last, though the air should not have changed so much. It felt as though the walls themselves were breathing, exhaling chill drafts that made the explorers huddle closer to their dim lanterns. Sleep was useless. Each creak of metal or rattle of loose wires pulled them awake again. Finally Marcus decided they could no longer live in half-truths and fear. If something was down here with them, it had to be faced. "We go into the hangar tomorrow," he said, his voice low but firm. No one argued, though every face was pale at the thought. They had all seen too much to deny it. The following day, armed with flashlights and whatever weapons they could find, a few old rifles, some tools turned sharp, they set out toward the far end of the base where the hangar lay. The corridors grew narrower, ceilings lower, walls streaked with old burns as if fires had once scorched them. The air thickened, carrying with it a faint smell of ash mixed with something organic, something alive. Sarah walked in the middle of the group, her heart pounding. She could almost sense the creature watching, hiding just out of sight, its presence pressing on her chest like a heavy stone. When they finally reached the hangar doors, they found them sealed shut with rusted locks and panels. It took all of Daniel's skill and Marcus's strength to force them open, the screech of tearing metal echoing so loudly it seemed to shake the base itself. What lay inside froze them where they stood. The hangar stretched vast and hollow, its ceiling lost in shadows, but in the center, chained to the ground by thick black links, was a creature that none of them had believed possible. A dragon. Its scales shimmered in the dusty light, dull but still glowing faintly with hues of silver and green. Its wings were folded tightly against its body, torn and scarred from years of restraint. The creature lifted its head slowly, eyes glowing like molten gold, and the explorers felt both terror and sorrow at once. This was not the wild beast they had imagined in the shadows. It was alive, intelligent, and unbearably tired. Sarah's breath caught as the dragon's gaze locked onto hers. For a moment, she felt a rush of emotion not her own: pain, fear, loneliness, and something else, something softer. It was trying to speak, not with words, but through feelings, through memories it poured into her mind. She staggered back, tears stinging her eyes as images flashed before her. Soldiers in dark uniforms, laboratories filled with smoke, the dragon screaming as chains bound it tighter. She saw fire, battles, and then abandonment, the base falling silent as the last humans fled, leaving the creature behind to rot. Marcus steadied her, asking what she saw, but Sarah could only whisper, "They used it. They hurt it. And they left it here." Daniel cursed, stepping closer to study the chains. They were not simple restraints but advanced technology, pulsing faintly with energy, feeding on the dragon's strength to keep it weak. The creature growled low, not at them, but at the chains themselves, as if begging for release. The group argued in hushed voices. Daniel wanted to leave, to seal the doors and forget what they had seen. Marcus shook his head, torn between fear and compassion. Sarah stood silently, unable to look away from the dragon's eyes. She felt its pain as if it were her own, but deeper than that, she felt its hope, the smallest spark of trust reaching out toward her. Then the sound of machinery hummed to life somewhere in the base, faint at first but growing louder. Old screens along the hangar walls flickered on, showing warnings in red letters. The dragon shuddered and pulled at its chains, wings twitching with restrained fury. Marcus swore under his breath, realizing the base had not been dead after all. Their entry, their noise, their presence had awakened something buried in the systems. "We've triggered an alert," he said, his face pale. The others stared at him, fear rising. An alert to who? Daniel asked, but the answer was clear. Whoever had built this prison, whoever had abandoned it, now knew the dragon was alive. Sarah reached out with trembling hands, not touching but holding her palm close to the dragon's muzzle. The creature lowered its head, exhaling a slow, hot breath that swept across her face. It was a gesture of trust, fragile but real. And in that instant, she understood the truth: this was no monster. This was a prisoner, a survivor, and now it was their responsibility. The growl of distant engines rumbled through the walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. Something was coming, drawn by the signal. The dragon's eyes burned brighter, not with fear but with warning, and Sarah whispered the words that none of them wanted to hear. "We're not alone anymore. And we don't have much time." The base no longer felt abandoned. It pulsed with life, humming with systems that had slept for decades but now glowed faintly on the walls. Screens flickered, strange codes scrolling across them in languages the explorers did not understand. Every hallway they passed was lit by a low red glow, warning lights spinning slowly as if the base itself was preparing for something. Marcus led the group back to the main control room, his jaw tight, his voice sharp when he spoke. "We need answers. No more guesses. We find out what this place was." The others followed, their fear mingling with a desperate need to understand what they had woken. In the control room, Daniel worked furiously on the consoles, prying open panels, forcing the half-dead machines to speak. Sparks hissed, dust filled the air, and then finally the monitors cleared, revealing files long buried. The story unfolded in fragments. Decades ago, the military had discovered something rare, something ancient, hidden deep within distant systems: dragons. Not mythical creatures, not legends, but living beings, intelligent and powerful, their bodies brimming with energy unlike anything humans had ever harnessed. The files showed diagrams of experiments, images of dragons in cages, chains wrapped around glowing wings, soldiers standing with cold eyes as creatures screamed against their restraints. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through. These dragons had been captured, tested, turned into living weapons. But the projects had failed. Dragons did not bend easily to control, and one by one they had died in agony, until only one remained. The one chained in the hangar. "They didn't abandon this base," Sarah whispered. "They buried it. They buried him." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stared at the screen, silent, the weight of guilt pressing down though none of this had been their doing. Daniel swore, slamming his fist against the console. "We shouldn't be here. We should leave before." His voice cut off as the entire room vibrated, a deep tremor rolling through the floors. Somewhere above, metal groaned as if a giant hand had gripped the base and shaken it. Sarah looked toward the ceiling, her chest tight. "They are coming," she whispered. The files had been a warning system as much as a record. The moment the base powered on, a signal had gone out across the stars. Whoever had created this prison now knew their secret was awake again. Marcus clenched his jaw, eyes hard. "We can't just leave him," he said, nodding toward the hangar in the distance. "If they come, they'll take him again. Or worse." The group argued, fear clashing with morality. Daniel wanted to run, to take their ship and vanish before the incoming fleet arrived. Sarah stood firm, her eyes burning. He's alive because he fought to survive. Because he never gave up. And now he trusts us. She glanced at the dragon in her mind, remembering the warmth of its breath, the way its eyes had met hers not with rage but with sorrow. "We can't betray that." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of machines. Then Marcus nodded, slowly. "We stay. We fight if we must. But first, we free him." The decision made, they returned to the hangar. The dragon lay coiled, its golden eyes watching, chains glowing faintly with cruel energy. As they stepped closer, it stirred, pulling weakly against its bonds. Sarah raised her hand, calming it, speaking softly though she did not know if it understood words. Perhaps it was not the words but the intent that mattered, for the dragon lowered its head, exhaling a breath that washed over her like heat from a furnace. Marcus studied the restraints. They were built into the floor, fused with alien technology no human hand could easily dismantle. But Daniel, still muttering about madness, knelt and began working. Sparks showered as he cut wires, twisted bolts, forced open power conduits. The dragon growled softly, wings twitching as each lock dimmed, each chain weakened. Then, with a sudden hiss, the first shackle fell free, crashing to the floor like thunder. The dragon flinched, then stilled, eyes locked on the humans. Another shackle released, and another. With each fall, the air grew hotter, charged with power long suppressed. Sarah felt her heart hammering, fear and awe mixing in equal measure. Finally the last chain snapped, and the dragon rose slowly, stretching wings that unfurled with a sound like tearing storms. Dust and ash swirled as the creature lifted its head, free for the first time in decades. The explorers backed away, weapons forgotten, their eyes wide. For a long moment, the dragon simply stood, staring down at them, its gaze unreadable. Then it lowered its head to Sarah, pressing its scaled muzzle gently against her chest. Her breath caught, and she raised a trembling hand to touch it. The bond was real. But before relief could take hold, the ground shook again, harder this time. From outside the base came the roar of engines, the rumble of ships descending through the atmosphere. Dust rained from the ceiling, alarms wailed across the base, and the monitors flickered with new images, heavily armed vessels breaking through the sky. Daniel's face went white. "They are here." Marcus lifted his weapon though it seemed so small, so useless against the threat that had come. The dragon lifted its head, eyes burning, wings flexing as fire simmered deep in its throat. It was no longer a prisoner. It was a storm waiting to be unleashed. And now, for the first time in its life, it was not alone. The first blast shook the abandoned base so violently that dust poured from the ceilings and broken panels clattered to the floor. The explorers scrambled for cover as the deep roar of engines echoed above them, followed by the unmistakable whine of weapons charging. The mercenaries had arrived, fast, ruthless, and already breaching the outer walls. Marcus barked orders, pulling the group toward defensive positions, but everyone knew the truth. They were just settlers with old rifles and survival gear. Against professional killers with ships and firepower, they had no chance. Yet something stirred in the hangar, something far greater than human strength. The dragon, newly freed, unfurled its wings, the membranes cracked and scarred but still magnificent. Its golden eyes burned as it raised its head, listening to the thunder above. Sarah stood closest, her hand pressed against the creature's scales. She felt its heart pounding, not with fear but with anger, the kind of fury that had been chained for decades. When the ceiling above cracked open and mercenaries poured in, armored and armed with glowing rifles, Sarah whispered one word. "Fight." The mercenaries moved with practiced precision, forming a line and aiming directly at the humans. "Step away from the asset," one of them barked, voice cold and mechanical through his helmet. "You have no authority here. That creature belongs to us." Marcus raised his weapon, though his hands shook. Not anymore. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then the dragon roared. It was not just sound, it was a storm, a blast of power that shook the walls and shattered glass across the hangar. The mercenaries staggered back, some clutching their helmets as the shockwave rattled through their bones. Before they could recover, the dragon lunged, chains still dangling from its body like whips of broken metal. Its claws tore through steel, its tail slammed mercenaries aside like toys. Fire erupted from its throat, a torrent of heat that turned the front line of soldiers into nothing more than ash and smoke. The base shook with chaos. Daniel dragged Sarah back as debris fell, but she refused to leave the dragon's side. "It's protecting us," she shouted over the roar, her voice raw with awe. Marcus fired his rifle, managing to drop one of the attackers, but most of the work belonged to the dragon. Yet the mercenaries were relentless. From the breach above, more poured in, drones buzzing like wasps, their weapons lighting up the hangar. Energy blasts seared across the floor, scorching the dragon's wings. It staggered, snarling, but refused to fall. One of the mercenaries raised a launcher, aiming directly at its chest. Sarah's scream tore through the hangar as the missile fired, but the dragon whipped its body around, shielding the humans with its own scales. The explosion shook the room, fire and smoke engulfing them. When it cleared, the dragon still stood, its body burned but unbroken, eyes blazing brighter than ever. With a roar that shook the very ground, it leapt upward, crashing through the broken ceiling, wings beating against the sky. Outside, the battlefield spread across the ruins. Mercenary ships hovered, their weapons firing beams of light into the ground. The dragon rose into the storm, fire spilling from its mouth, slamming into the closest ship. Metal screamed as the vessel spiraled out of control and crashed into the earth. The humans below watched in awe as the creature they had freed tore through the enemy like vengeance given form. Inside the base, Marcus grabbed Daniel and pulled him toward the control room. "We can help," he shouted. "The base has defenses, cannons, shields, something." Daniel cursed but followed, frantically working at consoles, pulling wires, forcing dead systems to spark back to life. Slowly, turrets rose from the ground outside, ancient but still functional, turning their barrels on the invaders. Explosions lit the sky as cannons fired, joining the dragon in its furious battle. Sarah stood in the hangar's ruins, staring upward. She could feel every strike, every cry of rage, every wound the dragon took as though it echoed in her own chest. This was not just a beast. It was a survivor, and now it was their defender. Yet even with its strength, the enemy was too many. Ships still circled above, drones swarmed like insects, and more soldiers advanced on foot. The dragon faltered, one wing torn by fire, its movements slower now. Marcus returned, sweat streaking his face. "We can't hold them forever," he shouted. Daniel added, "If they want the dragon, they'll burn the whole planet to get it." The dragon crashed back to the ground with a thunderous impact, its body shaking with exhaustion. Still, it planted itself between the humans and the mercenaries, growling low, wings spread wide though blood dripped from its scales. Sarah ran to its side, pressing her hands against its face, whispering through tears, "Don't give up. Please. Not now." The dragon blinked slowly, its golden eyes softening. Then it lifted its head once more, gathering what strength remained. Fire burned deep in its chest, brighter and hotter than before. With a final roar, it unleashed everything, a wave of flame so powerful it split the night, swallowing ships and soldiers alike in blinding fire. The shockwave knocked everyone to the ground, dust and heat blasting through the ruins. When the light faded, silence followed. Smoke rose from wreckage, mercenaries scattered or dead, ships fallen from the sky. The base was shattered, but for a moment, they had won. Sarah looked at the dragon, her chest tightening. Its head drooped, wings trembling, breath shallow. It had saved them, but the cost was clear. Marcus stepped forward, voice heavy with both awe and dread. "It's not over. That signal's still out there. More will come." Sarah pressed her forehead against the dragon's scales, whispering through tears, "Then we'll be ready. Together." The night sky above flickered with distant stars, but in that moment, none of them felt alone. They had a dragon on their side, and the galaxy would soon learn what that truly meant. The battlefield was silent except for the crackle of fire and the hiss of cooling metal. Smoke curled into the sky, painting the stars with a dark haze. The explorers stood among the ruins, their hearts still pounding from the chaos that had nearly consumed them. The dragon lay at the center of it all, its vast body heaving with each breath, wings torn, scales scorched, but its golden eyes still glowing faintly in the dark. Sarah knelt beside it, pressing her hands gently against its muzzle, whispering words she hoped it could feel. Marcus stood behind her, rifle still in hand though his arms trembled with exhaustion. Daniel sat slumped against a broken wall, shaking his head, muttering about how none of this made sense, how they were still alive when they should all be dead. Yet even as he spoke, he looked at the dragon with something close to respect. "It saved us," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying across the ruins. "It chose us." Her words silenced Daniel's doubts, silenced even Marcus's endless thoughts of strategy and survival. For a moment, they simply stood together, realizing they were bound to this creature by something far greater than circumstance. But the moment of peace did not last. The consoles in the control room flickered to life again, glowing with new warnings. Across the screens, symbols repeated in flashing red: signal sent, response incoming. Marcus clenched his jaw, his face pale. "That was just the first wave," he said. "The real force hasn't arrived yet." Sarah looked up, her eyes burning with defiance. "Then we fight again. But this time, not just for survival. For him." She placed her hand firmly against the dragon's scales, and the creature rumbled low in its chest, as if agreeing. Hours passed as they worked, repairing what they could of the base's defenses. Daniel rewired turrets, Marcus scavenged weapons, Sarah tended to the dragon's wounds, whispering to it, feeding it what little they had left. The bond between them grew stronger, an unspoken connection that needed no words. The dragon trusted her, and she trusted it with her life. By dawn, the sky above began to shimmer. A fleet approached, larger, deadlier than the mercenary strike team. Enormous ships broke through the clouds, their shadows stretching across the ground like dark wings. The explorers stood ready, though fear gnawed at them. Marcus raised his weapon, Sarah gripped a metal rod, Daniel muttered that they were insane. But the dragon rose slowly to its feet, battered yet unbroken, its wings spreading wide despite their tears. The sight filled the humans with a courage they hadn't known they possessed. The enemy descended in full force. Dropships landed, soldiers swarmed, drones filled the air like a storm. The ground shook beneath their march. This was no raid, this was a reclamation. They wanted the dragon, and they would burn everything to have it. The dragon stepped forward, towering over the humans, fire glowing deep in its throat. But just before the battle began, something unexpected happened. The dragon lowered its head to Sarah once more, and in that moment she felt a flood of thoughts and feelings not her own. Images flashed through her mind, stars, distant worlds, other dragons long gone. A memory of a great war, of betrayal, of chains. And then, a choice. She gasped, tears filling her eyes as she understood. The dragon was ready to fight, but it was also ready to sacrifice everything to keep them safe. "No," she whispered, gripping its scales. "Not alone. Not again." The battle broke open like thunder. Soldiers advanced, weapons blazing, drones swarmed in deadly patterns. The explorers fought desperately, the base's cannons roaring, but it was the dragon who held the line. Fire lit the sky, claws tore through steel, wings battered enemies aside. Every movement was fury and defiance, every roar a promise that it would not be caged again. Yet the enemy was relentless. A blast struck the dragon's side, another tore across its wing. It staggered, blood glowing faintly as it spilled across the ground. Still it fought, still it shielded the humans with its body, never retreating. Sarah screamed, urging it on, tears streaming down her face. Marcus fired until his weapon ran dry, then swung it like a club, refusing to give in. Daniel, once so fearful, stood beside them, throwing explosives into the swarm, his face set with grim determination. At last, in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the dragon lifted its head high, wings outstretched, fire building deep in its chest. The ground trembled, the air burned, and with a final roar it unleashed everything it had left. A torrent of flame brighter than the sun tore through the battlefield, consuming ships, soldiers, drones, everything in its path. The shockwave flattened walls, shattered windows, shook the earth itself. When it ended, silence fell. Smoke and ash drifted on the wind. The enemy was gone, burned, broken, scattered. The fleet above retreated, crippled by the dragon's final strike. The explorers staggered to their feet, coughing, eyes wide with disbelief. They had survived. They had won. But when Sarah turned back, her heart broke. The dragon lay on the ground, its body still, its golden eyes dimming. She fell to her knees, pressing her hands against its face, begging, pleading, whispering through sobs. "Please, don't leave us. Please." For a moment, there was nothing. Then the dragon's eyes flickered once more, soft and warm, and Sarah felt a single pulse of emotion, love, gratitude, and peace. It had chosen them, and it had saved them. Slowly, its breath faded, its body stilling, but its memory lingered like fire in their hearts. The explorers stood together, silent, as dawn broke across the ruined base. They had come seeking a home, and they had found something far greater, a bond, a truth, a story that would echo across the stars. And far above, in the vastness of space, the signal still traveled, carrying the tale of a dragon who chose love over survival, and of the humans who stood with it. Whatever came next, they would not face it alone. They were no longer just explorers. They were witnesses to something the galaxy had tried to bury. And now, the galaxy would remember.